Part 1. The Confession. The old leather couch in Dad's basement creaked under our weight, the sound echoing off concrete walls lined with his fishing gear and forgotten Christmas decorations. I could smell sawdust from his workshop mixed with the faint scent of motor oil that always clung to Greg's clothes. His breath was warm against my neck as he pressed closer, one hand braced against the armrest, the other tracing the curve of my hip through my thin summer dress. "Rachel," he whispered, my name barely audible over the hum of the old furnace in the corner. I was 43 years old, a mother, a wife, and I was letting my father's best friend touch me in ways that made my chest tight with want and shame all at once. I had the kind of body that carried the soft curves of motherhood, full hips, a small waist, and a chest that rose and fell with each quickening breath. My summer dress clung to me in all the wrong places, or maybe all the right ones, thin cotton stretching lightly over my thighs and catching just above my knees. A lock of dark auburn hair had slipped from the bun I'd twisted up hurriedly, curling against my cheek. Freckles dusted across my collarbone, which peeked out beneath the fallen strap of my dress. My skin, still golden from early summer sun, seemed to glow in the dim basement light. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and more alive than I had in years. My eyes, a soft shade of hazel that shifted in the light, held something between hesitation and hunger. They flicked between his face and his hands, unsure whether to run or reach out. My voice, when I spoke, carried a slight rasp, the kind that came from too many late nights and not enough being heard. Even my scent betrayed me, a mix of warm vanilla lotion and something faintly floral, lingering from the perfume I hadn't worn in years, but had sprayed on that morning without thinking. The basement was dim, lit only by the small window near the ceiling where late afternoon sun filtered through dusty glass. I could hear Dad upstairs in the kitchen, probably making his evening coffee, completely unaware that his daughter was downstairs with Greg, trembling as his thumb brushed along my collarbone where my dress had slipped off my shoulder. "We shouldn't," I breathed, but my hands were already reaching for him, fingers curling into the fabric of his work shirt. He was 51, 8 years older than me, with grey threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He'd been Dad's friend since before I was born, had watched me grow up, had been at my wedding 17 years ago. "I know," he said, his voice rough. His hand moved to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Neither could I. That was the problem. It had started 3 months ago when I'd come to help Dad clean out the garage. Greg had been there, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on his forehead as he lifted boxes. He'd caught me staring and smiled, not the polite smile he'd always given me, but something different, something that made heat pool low in my belly. Now his mouth was inches from mine, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. My dress had ridden up when I'd shifted on the couch, and his eyes dropped to where the fabric had bunched around my thighs. "Rachel," he said again, and this time it sounded like a prayer. I should have pushed him away, should have reminded him that my father was upstairs, that my husband was at home waiting for me, that my teenage kids would be wondering where I was. Instead, I let him kiss me. His lips were soft but insistent, and I tasted coffee and something else, something that was purely him. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as my mind screamed that this was wrong. When he deepened the kiss, I made a sound I didn't recognize, something desperate and hungry. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes dark and searching. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I opened my mouth, the word right there on my tongue, stop. It would have been so easy, but looking at him, seeing the want in his eyes that matched my own, I couldn't say it. "I can't," I admitted, my voice breaking. That's when he kissed me again, harder this time, his hand sliding down to rest on my thigh. I could feel the calluses on his palm through the thin fabric of my dress, rough from years of construction work. The sensation sent shivers up my spine. This didn't feel like a choice. It felt like gravity. I'd been married to David for 17 years, and somewhere along the way, we'd stopped seeing each other, really seeing each other. He looked through me now, past me, around me, but never at me. Not the way Greg was looking at me now, like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. When Greg's hand moved higher, fingers tracing patterns on my inner thigh, I gasped and arched into his touch. The sound echoed in the quiet basement, mixing with our ragged breathing and the distant sound of Dad's footsteps overhead. "You're so beautiful," Greg murmured against my throat, his lips brushing my pulse point. I've wanted this for so long. I wanted to tell him the same thing, wanted to admit that I'd been thinking about him for months, that I'd started finding excuses to visit Dad just to see him, but the words stuck in my throat, tangled up with guilt and need. His hand was warm on my thigh, thumb stroking back and forth in a rhythm that made my breath catch. I could feel myself melting into the old couch, my body responding to his touch in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. One look, one touch, and everything I swore I wouldn't do, I did. The basement felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with tension and the weight of what we were doing. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the pulse of blood through my veins as Greg's mouth moved along my jaw. "We should go upstairs," I whispered, but I made no move to get up. "In a minute," he said, his voice muffled against my skin. But we both knew we wouldn't. We both knew this moment was all we had. Stolen and secret and wrong in every way that mattered. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't lonely. I just didn't want him to stop. His hand slid higher, fingers brushing the edge of my underwear, and I bit my lip to keep from crying out. The sensation was electric, sending shockwaves through my entire body. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched like this, like I was desirable, like I was worth wanting. "Greg," I breathed, his name a whisper in the dim light. He pulled back to look at me again, his eyes searching my face. "Are you sure?" No. I wasn't sure of anything except the way my body was responding to his touch, the way my heart was racing, the way I felt more alive in this moment than I had in years. Yes, I lied. Part 2. The Setup. 6 months earlier. I wouldn't have imagined myself here. 6 months ago, I was still trying to make my marriage work, still believing that the distance between David and me was just a phase, something we could work through if we just tried harder. But trying harder is exhausting when you're the only one trying. David worked late most nights, came home tired and distracted, ate dinner while scrolling through his phone. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics, who was picking up the kids, what bills needed paying, whether we needed groceries. We moved around each other like polite strangers sharing the same space. I'd started to feel invisible in my own life. That's when Dad asked me to help him with some projects around the house. Mom had been gone 3 years now, and he was finally ready to tackle some of the things she'd been asking him to fix for decades. I welcomed the distraction, the chance to feel useful again. Greg had been there from the beginning. Of course, he and Dad had been friends since high school, had worked construction together for 30 years before Dad retired. Greg still ran his own crew, still had the broad shoulders and strong hands that came from a lifetime of physical work. I'd always liked him. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. He'd been kind to me when I was growing up, never talked down to me the way some of Dad's other friends did. When I got married, he danced with me at the reception, told me I looked beautiful, wished me happiness, but I'd never really seen him, not until that day in the garage. I was wearing old jeans and a tank top, my hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Nothing special. But when I caught him looking at me, really looking, something shifted. The way his eyes lingered on my face, the way he smiled when I laughed at something Dad said. It was like he was seeing me for the first time. Or maybe I was seeing him for the first time. "You've got paint in your hair," he said later. When Dad had gone inside to answer the phone, I reached up self-consciously, trying to find it. "Where?" "Here," he said, stepping closer. "Let me." His fingers were gentle as he worked the dried paint from my hair, his touch sending unexpected shivers down my spine. We were standing close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "There," he said softly, but he didn't step back. We stood there for a moment, something electric passing between us. Then Dad came back outside, and the moment was broken, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, I found myself looking forward to those afternoons at Dad's house. Greg was always there, always ready with a smile or a joke, always seeming to notice things about me that no one else did. "You look tired," he said one day when I arrived, looking frazzled after a particularly difficult morning with the kids. "Thanks," I said dryly. "Just what every woman wants to hear." He laughed, but his eyes were serious. "I just meant you work too hard. You should take better care of yourself." When was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time someone had noticed that I was tired, that I was struggling, that I needed care? David certainly hadn't. David barely looked up from his laptop when I walked into a room. "I'm fine, Sarthite," I said. The automatic response I gave everyone. "You don't have to be fine all the time," Greg said quietly. "Not with me." Something in his voice made my chest tight. I looked at him, really looked, and saw understanding in his eyes, like he knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be taken for granted. "How's Janet?" I asked, deflecting. His wife had left him 2 years ago, moved to Florida with her sister. They'd never had kids, and the divorce had been quiet, amicable. "She's good," he said. "Happy. I think we weren't right for each other. Took us 25 years to figure that out." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Sometimes things just run their course. Sometimes you wake up one day and realize you're living with a stranger." The words hit too close to home. I looked away, focusing on the project we were working on, refinishing an old dresser that had belonged to my grandmother. "What about you?" he asked. "How are things with David?" I should have said fine, should have given him the same polite lie I gave everyone else. Instead, I found myself being honest. "Hard," I admitted. "We're like ships passing in the night. I can't remember the last time we really talked about anything that mattered." Greg nodded, understanding. "That's lonely." "Yeah," I whispered. "It is." We worked in comfortable silence after that, but something had changed between us. A door had been opened, and I wasn't sure I wanted to close it. The next week, he brought me coffee. Not Dad, me. He remembered that I liked it with cream and sugar, remembered that I always seemed to need caffeine by mid-afternoon. "You didn't have to do that," I said, touched by the gesture. "I wanted to," he said simply. Such a small thing, a cup of coffee, but it felt huge. Felt like someone was finally paying attention to me, finally seeing me as more than just a wife, a mother, a daughter, seeing me as Rachel. That's when I started to realize I was in trouble. I began looking forward to those afternoons more than I should have. Started taking extra care with my appearance, choosing clothes that flattered me, wearing perfume. I told myself it was just because it felt good to feel attractive again, but I knew I was lying. I was dressing for him. The tension between us grew slowly, like a pot coming to a boil. Lingering glances, accidental touches, Conversations that felt charged with meaning. Dad never seemed to notice, too focused on his projects to see what was happening right in front of him. One afternoon, we were working in the basement, organizing Dad's old tools. The space felt intimate, closed off from the rest of the world. We were sitting on the old couch, sorting through boxes, when our hands brushed, reaching for the same item. The contact was electric. We both froze, looking at each other, and I saw my own desire reflected in his eyes. "Rachel," he said. My name a question. I should have pulled away, should have made a joke, changed the subject, done anything to break the tension. Instead, I let my hand linger against his, let myself imagine what it would feel like to give in to what I was feeling. "We can't," I whispered. "I know," he said, but neither of us moved. That's when Dad called down the stairs, asking if we'd found his level. The spell was broken, and we sprang apart like guilty teenagers. But the damage was done. The line had been drawn, and we were both standing right on the edge of it. Is it still cheating if you were never really touched anymore? Part 3. The slow burn. The next few weeks were torture. Every interaction with Greg felt loaded with meaning. Every casual touch sent electricity through my body. I started making excuses to avoid Dad's house, but that only made things worse. I found myself thinking about Greg constantly, wondering what he was doing, whether he was thinking about me too. David noticed my distraction, but in his typical fashion, he assumed it was about him. "If you're upset about me working late again, just say so," he said one evening, not looking up from his laptop. "I'm not upset," I said, which was true. I wasn't upset about him working late. I was grateful for it. It gave me time to think, to remember what it felt like to be desired. "You've been weird lately," he said, distant. The irony wasn't lost on me. David, who hadn't really looked at me in months, was accusing me of being distant. "I'm fine," I said, the lie coming easily now. But I wasn't fine. I was falling apart, piece by piece, torn between guilt and longing. I lasted 2 weeks before I found myself back at Dad's house, ostensibly to help him with some yard work. Greg was there, of course, trimming hedges in the backyard. He looked up when I walked outside, and the smile that spread across his face made my knees weak. "Hey," he said, straightening up. "I was wondering when you'd come back." "I've been busy," I said, not meeting his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "I missed you." The admission hung in the air between us, dangerous and thrilling. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the same struggle in his eyes that I felt in my chest. "Greg," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. "I know," he said again. "I know this is complicated. I know we shouldn't, but I can't stop thinking about you. Rachel, I can't stop wanting to be near you." My heart was racing, my palms sweating. This was the moment. I could walk away, could pretend this conversation never happened, could go back to my safe, empty life. Instead, I stepped closer. "I think about you too," I whispered. The relief on his face was palpable. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing mine, but the contact sent shockwaves through my entire body. "What are we doing?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I don't want to stop." Neither did I. That was the problem. We worked side by side that afternoon. The tension between us so thick, I could barely breathe. Every time he handed me something, our fingers would touch. Every time he moved past me, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was exquisite torture. Dad went inside to make lunch, leaving us alone in the garden. Greg was kneeling beside a flower bed, pulling weeds, and I found myself staring at the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, the way his jeans hugged his thighs. "You're staring," he said without looking up. but I could hear the smile in his voice. "Sorry," I said, embarrassed at being caught. He looked up then, his eyes dark and intense. "Don't be sorry. I like it." The honesty in his voice made my breath catch. I knelt beside him, pretending to help with the weeds, but really just wanting to be closer to him. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "I know," he said, his hand covering mine in the dirt, "but I can't seem to care." We stayed like that for a moment, hands touching in the garden, the sun warm on our backs. It felt innocent and charged at the same time, like we were teenagers stealing a moment. "Rachel," he said, his voice rough. "Yeah? If things were different." "But they're not," I said, pulling my hand away. "No," he agreed. "They're not." But the words hung between us anyway, full of possibility and regret. That evening, I went home to my family, to my husband who barely looked up when I walked in the door, to my kids who were absorbed in their phones and homework. I made dinner, helped with math problems, did laundry, all the things I always did. But part of me was still in that garden, still feeling the warmth of Greg's hand on mine. I lay in bed that night next to David, listening to him snore, and thought about what Greg had said. If things were different, if I wasn't married, if he wasn't Dad's best friend, if we'd met at a different time, in a different life. But we hadn't. We'd met now, like this, with all these complications and impossibilities between us. The next week, I found myself at Dad's house again. And the week after that, each time, the tension between Greg and me grew stronger, more impossible to ignore. We started finding excuses to be alone together. He'd offer to help me carry something to my car. I'd volunteer to help him with a project in the basement. We never did anything more than talk, but the conversations felt intimate, charged with unspoken desire. "Tell me about when you were young," he said one afternoon. We were sitting on the back porch, taking a break from painting the deck. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," he said. "What you dreamed about, what you wanted to be when you grew up, what made you laugh." No one had asked me questions like that in years. David knew the facts of my life, but he'd never seemed interested in the dreams, the hopes, the parts of me that existed beyond wife and mother. "I wanted to be a teacher," I said. "Elementary school. I loved kids, loved the idea of shaping young minds. What happened?" "Life," I said with a shrug. "I got pregnant with Chloe right after college. David was just starting his career, and we needed the money, so I took a job at his father's insurance office. Temporary, we said, just until we got on our feet, and 17 years later, I'm still there." Greg was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "Do you regret it?" "I love my kids," I said automatically. "That's not what I asked." I looked at him, saw the genuine interest in his eyes, the way he was really listening to my answer. When was the last time someone had cared about my regrets, my dreams deferred? "Sometimes," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder who I might have been." "You could still be her," he said quietly. "It's not too late. I'm 43, Greg. I have responsibilities." "You have a life," he said, "and you deserve to live it." The conversation stayed with me for days. You deserve to live it. Such simple words, but they felt revolutionary. I started thinking about what that might mean, what it would look like to live for myself instead of just existing for everyone else. And every time I thought about it, I thought about Greg. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Dad had gone to a doctor's appointment, leaving Greg and me alone to finish staining the deck furniture. We were working in the garage, the rain drumming on the roof, creating a cocoon of intimacy around us. I was reaching for a brush when I slipped on the wet concrete. Greg caught me, his arms wrapping around my waist, pulling me against his chest. For a moment, We just stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice rough with want. I could feel his heart beating against my chest, could see the desire in his eyes that matched my own. This was the moment, the point of no return. "We can't," I whispered, but I made no move to pull away. "I know," he said, his hands tightening on my waist. "But I want to." "So do I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. "What are we going to do?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I was tired of being invisible, tired of being taken for granted, tired of living a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "I don't know," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. I knew exactly what we were going to do. It was just a matter of when. If he knew it was wrong too, why didn't he stop either? Part 4. Crossing the line. It happened on a Tuesday. Dad had called that morning, asking if I could come by to help him move some furniture. David was traveling for work. The kids were at school, and I had the day off. I almost said no, knowing Greg would be there, knowing how dangerous it was for us to be alone together. But I said yes anyway. I told myself I was just helping my father. I told myself I could handle being around Greg without anything happening. I told myself a lot of lies that morning. When I arrived, Dad was loading tools into his truck. "I have to run to the hardware store," he said, kissing my cheek. "Greg is inside, moving the dresser from the guest room. Can you help him? I'll be back in an hour." An hour. Alone with Greg for an hour. "Sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I found him in the guest room, wrestling with my grandmother's old dresser. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, desire, resignation. "Hey," he said, straightening up. "Your dad went to get some brackets for the shelving." "I know," I said. "He asked me to help you with this." We both knew it was a lie. The dresser wasn't that heavy. Dad could have moved it himself, or waited for Greg to help him later. But neither of us called it out. "It needs to go down to the basement," Greg said. "For storage." The basement. Of course, we worked together to maneuver the dresser down the narrow stairs, our bodies pressed close in the confined space. Every time we had to adjust our grip, our hands would brush. Every time we navigated a corner, our hips would bump together. By the time we reached the bottom, I was breathing hard. And it wasn't from the exertion. "Where do you want it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Over there," he said, nodding toward the far corner. "By the couch." The couch. The same couch where we'd sorted through Dad's tools, where our hands had touched, where I'd first admitted to myself that I wanted him. We set the dresser down, both of us breathing hard. The basement felt smaller than usual, more intimate. The only light came from the small window and a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting everything in soft shadows. "Rachel," Greg said, and something in his voice made me look at him. He was standing close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of sawdust and honest work. "We should go back upstairs," I said, but I didn't move. "We should," he agreed, but he stepped closer instead. "Greg," I whispered, his name a warning and a plea all at once. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice rough. "I try, but I can't. You're in my head all the time." "Don't," I said, but the word came out broken. "Don't what? Don't want you. Don't think about what it would feel like to touch you, to kiss you, to—" "Stop," I said, but I was moving toward him even as I said it. "Make me," he challenged, his eyes dark with desire. That's when I broke. I closed the distance between us. my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him down to me. Our lips met in a kiss that was desperate, hungry, months of pent-up desire finally finding release. He groaned against my mouth, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me against him. I could feel the solid warmth of his chest, the strength in his arms, the way his heart was racing just as fast as mine. Rachel. He breathed against my lips, my name a prayer. I should have stopped then, should have pulled away, made some excuse, gone back upstairs to wait for Dad. Instead, I kissed him again, deeper this time, my hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. He backed me toward the couch, his mouth never leaving mine. When the backs of my legs hit the cushions, I sat down hard, looking up at him with wide eyes. "We can't," I whispered. But even as I said it, I was reaching for him, pulling him down to me. "I know," he said, settling beside me on the couch. "But I don't want to stop." Neither did I. That was the terrifying truth. I didn't want to stop, didn't want to be responsible, didn't want to think about consequences. I just wanted to feel alive again. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. "Are you sure?" No, I wasn't sure of anything except the way my body was responding to his touch, the way my heart was racing, the way I felt more like myself than I had in years. "Yes," I lied. He kissed me again, softer this time, his hands sliding down to rest on my waist. I could feel the calluses on his palms through my thin blouse, could feel the warmth of his skin seeping through the fabric. When he started to unbutton my blouse, I didn't stop him. When he pushed the fabric aside, exposing my shoulder, I arched into his touch. When he pressed me back against the couch cushions, I went willingly. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against my throat, his lips trailing fire across my skin. I hadn't felt beautiful in so long. David barely looked at me anymore, certainly never told me I was beautiful. But Greg looked at me like I was something precious, something worth wanting. His hands were gentle as they explored, mapping the curves of my body like he was memorizing them. Every touch sent electricity through me, waking up parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. "Greg!" I gasped when his mouth found the sensitive spot where my neck met my shoulder. "I know," he said, understanding the conflict in my voice. "I know this is crazy." But crazy felt good. Crazy felt alive. We moved together on that old couch, our bodies finding a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word was a betrayal and a homecoming all at once. I lost myself in the sensation of being wanted, being desired, being seen. For the first time in years, I felt like Rachel, not David's wife, not the kid's mother, not Dad's daughter, just Rachel, a woman who was beautiful and desirable and worth wanting. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the narrow couch, breathing hard, the reality of what we'd done settling over us like a heavy blanket. "Oh God," I whispered, the guilt crashing over me in waves. "What have we done?" Greg tightened his arms around me, his lips pressing against my hair. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I can't bring myself to regret it." Neither could I, and that scared me more than anything. We heard Dad's truck in the driveway and sprang apart, frantically straightening our clothes, trying to look like we'd been doing nothing more than moving furniture. By the time he made it down the stairs, we were standing on opposite sides of the basement, both of us flushed and breathing hard. "How's it going down here?" Dad asked, oblivious to the tension crackling between us. "Good," I managed, my voice only slightly shaky. "We got the dresser moved." "Great," he said. "Thanks for helping, sweetheart." "Greg, you ready to work on those shelves?" "Sure," Greg said, not looking at me. I made my excuses and left. my hands shaking as I drove home. What had I done? What had we done? But even as the guilt threatened to overwhelm me, I couldn't forget the way Greg had looked at me, the way he'd touched me, the way he'd made me feel alive again. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and the worst part was, I wanted to cross it again. Part 5. The Aftermath. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to David, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of what had happened in Dad's basement. The guilt was overwhelming, a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But underneath the guilt was something else, something that felt dangerously like satisfaction. For the first time in years, I'd felt desired, wanted, alive. David stirred beside me, reaching out in his sleep. His hand landed on my hip, and I flinched away from his touch. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd just been unfaithful to my husband, and now I couldn't bear for him to touch me. I slipped out of bed and went to the bathroom. Staring at myself in the mirror, I looked the same as always. Brown hair, brown eyes, the fine lines that were starting to appear around my eyes and mouth. But something was different. There was a flush to my skin, a brightness in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I looked like a woman who'd been thoroughly kissed. The thought made me sick with guilt and dizzy with remembered pleasure all at once. I avoided Dad's house for the next week, making excuses when he called. I threw myself into work, into taking care of the kids, into anything that would keep my mind off what had happened. But it didn't work. Every quiet moment, every lull in conversation, my mind would drift back to that basement, to Greg's hands on my skin, to the way he'd whispered my name. David noticed my distraction, but in his typical fashion, he assumed it was about household logistics. "Did you remember to call the plumber about the kitchen sink?" he asked one evening, not looking up from his laptop. "Yes," I said, though I hadn't. I'd been too busy thinking about Greg to remember mundane things like plumbing. "And you'll pick up my dry cleaning tomorrow?" "Yes," I said again, adding it to the mental list of tasks that seemed to define my existence. This was my life. This was what I'd chosen. A husband who saw me as a personal assistant. Kids who barely looked up from their phones when I walked into a room. A job that paid the bills, but didn't fulfill me in any meaningful way. Was it any wonder I'd been tempted by a man who actually saw me? My phone buzzed with a text message. My heart jumped, hoping it was Greg. But it was just a reminder about Chloe's soccer practice. I felt foolish for the disappointment that washed over me. But then, later that evening, after the kids were in bed and David was absorbed in his laptop, my phone buzzed again. "I can't stop thinking about you." The message was from an unknown number, but I knew it was Greg. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I should delete the message, should block the number, should pretend this had never happened. Instead, I found myself typing back. "We can't do this." "I know," came his immediate reply. "But I needed you to know." I stared at the phone for a long time, my heart racing. Then I typed, "I can't stop thinking about you either." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "Can I see you?" he wrote back. "No," I typed, then deleted it. Typed yes, then deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, "This is dangerous." "I know," he replied, "but I'm willing to risk it if you are." Was I? Was I willing to risk my marriage, my family, my entire life for this man who made me feel alive again? I turned off my phone without answering, but the next day, I found myself driving past the construction site where Greg worked. I told myself I was just running errands, that it was a coincidence, but when I saw his truck in the parking lot, my heart started racing. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. "I'm outside your work," I texted. He appeared in my passenger seat 5 minutes later, his face flushed, his eyes dark with desire and concern. "Rachel," he said, my name a question and a statement all at once. "I know this is crazy, but I said, not looking at him. "I know we shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stop thinking about you either." He reached over, his fingers brushing mine where they gripped the steering wheel. The contact sent electricity through my entire body. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never done anything like this before." "Neither have I," he said. "Not like this. Not with someone who matters. Someone who matters." The words hit me like a physical blow, because I realized that's exactly what I was to him. Not just a conquest, not just a way to pass the time. I mattered to him. When was the last time I'd mattered to anyone? "We need to talk," I said. "Really talk. About what this means. What we're doing." "Okay," he said. "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere private. Somewhere we won't be seen." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a little diner about 20 miles outside town, off the highway. We could meet there." "When? Davidoro? Lunchtime?" I thought about my schedule, about the lies I'd have to tell, about the line I was about to cross again. "Okay," I said. He squeezed my hand once, then got out of the car. I watched him walk back to the construction site, his shoulders broad, his stride confident. He looked back once, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with what I'd just agreed to. I was going to meet him. We were going to talk, and I had a feeling that talking was just the beginning. That night, I lay in bed next to David, listening to him snore, and thought about what I was doing. I was having an affair. The word felt foreign, impossible. I wasn't the kind of woman who had affairs. I was responsible, reliable, boring. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd been boring for so long that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. The next day, I told David I was having lunch with a friend from work. The lie came easily, which should have bothered me more than it did. I drove to the diner with my heart in my throat, half hoping Greg wouldn't show up, half terrified that he wouldn't. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking as nervous as I felt. When he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that made my knees weak. "Hi," he said, as I slid into the seat across from him. "Hi," I said back, suddenly shy. We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of what we'd done hanging between us. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for putting you in this position, for making things complicated." "You didn't make me do anything," I said. "I wanted it too." "Did you?" he asked, his eyes searching my face. "Or did I pressure you?" "Greg," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I wanted it. I wanted you. That's what scares me." He turned his hand over, palm up, and I laced our fingers together. Such a simple gesture, but it felt intimate, dangerous. "What are we doing?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know I can't stay away from you." "We have to be careful," I said. "If David finds out, if Dad finds out." "I know," he said. "We'll be careful." But even as we made promises about discretion, about being smart, I could see the hunger in his eyes that matched my own. We were like addicts promising to quit while already planning our next fix. We talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, about our marriages, our regrets, our dreams, about the way we'd felt in that basement, the way we felt now, sitting across from each other in a dingy diner, holding hands like teenagers. When it was time to leave, he walked me to my car. "When can I see you again?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. But we both knew it wouldn't be long. He kissed me then, right there in the parking lot, and I let him. I kissed him back, my hands fisting in his shirt, my body pressing against his. "Soon," I whispered against his lips. "Soon," he agreed. I drove home with my lips still tingling, my body still humming with desire. I was in deep now, deeper than I'd ever intended to go. How do you stop needing something that finally made you feel alive? Part 6. The Reckoning. 3 weeks later, I was living a double life. On the surface, everything looked normal. I went to work, took care of the kids, made dinner, did laundry. But underneath, I was someone else entirely. Someone who snuck out for lunch meetings that lasted hours. Someone who bought new lingerie and hid it in the back of my drawer. Someone who felt more alive than she had in years. Greg and I had developed a routine. We'd meet at the diner, or sometimes at a small motel outside town. We'd talk, we'd touch. We'd lose ourselves in each other for a few stolen hours before returning to our separate lives. I told myself it was just physical, just a midlife crisis, just something I needed to get out of my system. But I was lying to myself. It was more than that, much more. I was falling in love with him. The realization hit me one afternoon as we lay tangled together in the cheap motel sheets, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice soft in the dim light. "Nothing," I lied, but he saw through it. "Rachel," he said, turning to face me. "Talk to me." I looked at him, at this man who'd turned my world upside down, and felt my heart clench with an emotion I couldn't name. "I think I'm falling in love with you," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. His eyes went wide, and for a moment, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then he smiled, soft and sad and beautiful. "I think I fell in love with you the first day you walked into your father's garage," he said. "I've just been waiting for you to catch up." The admission should have terrified me. Instead, it filled me with a warmth I'd never felt before. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But we'll figure it out." But figuring it out proved more complicated than either of us had imagined. The first sign of trouble came on a Thursday evening. I was making dinner when Chloe, my 16-year-old, looked up from her phone with a frown. "Mom, why is Grandpa's friend Greg asking about you on Facebook?" My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "He sent me a friend request, and when I looked at his profile, he'd been asking mutual friends about you. Like, when you graduated high school, where you went to college, stuff like that." I forced my voice to stay steady. "That's weird. Maybe he's just being friendly." Chloe shrugged and went back to her phone, but I could feel my world starting to tilt off its axis. That night, I called Greg. "We need to be more careful," I said without preamble. "What happened?" I told him about Chloe's observation, about the Facebook searches. "Shit," he said. "I'm sorry. I wanted to know more about you, about your life before. Greg, we can't leave digital footprints. We can't give people reasons to ask questions." "I know," he said. "I'll be more careful." But the damage was done. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and I found myself jumping at every phone call, every unexpected question, every sideways glance. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was at Dad's house, ostensibly helping him with some paperwork, when Greg arrived unexpectedly. Dad was in the bathroom, and Greg and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. "I missed you," he said, stepping closer. "Don't," I whispered, glancing toward the hallway. Not here. But he was already reaching for me, his hands settling on my waist, pulling me against him. "Just for a second," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. That's when Dad walked back into the kitchen. The silence was deafening. Dad stood in the doorway, his eyes moving from Greg to me, taking in our proximity, the guilty expressions on our faces. the way we sprang apart like we'd been burned. "Dad," I started, but he held up a hand. "Don't," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Just don't." Greg cleared his throat. "Frank, I should go." "Yeah," Dad said, not looking at either of us. "You should." After Greg left, Dad and I sat at his kitchen table in silence. I could feel his disappointment radiating across the space between us, could see the hurt in his eyes. "How long?" he asked finally. "Dad." "How long, Rachel?" "A few weeks," I whispered. He nodded, his jaw tight. "He's my best friend." "I know." "You're married." "I know." "You have children." "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "I know all of that." "No." "Don't you think I know all of that?" He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something shift in his expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Concern. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. "What? In your marriage? With David? Are you happy?" I opened my mouth to say yes, to give him the automatic response I gave everyone. But looking at my father, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, I couldn't lie anymore. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "That doesn't make this right," he said. "I know, but it explains it." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of my confession hanging between us. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "You need to figure it out," he said, "before someone gets hurt worse than they already are." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I won't tell David," he said finally. "But I can't have Greg here anymore. Not while this is going on. Dad, I'm sorry, Rachel, but I can't watch this happen in my house. I can't be part of it." I understood. I hated it, but I understood. That night, I called Greg and told him what had happened. "So what now?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Dad says he can't have you at the house anymore." "And us?" I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about my father's words, about the look in his eyes, about the choice I was facing. "I need time," I said finally, "to think, to figure out what I want." "Rachel, please," I said, "just give me some time." He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. "Okay," he said finally. "But Rachel, whatever you decide, I want you to know that these past few weeks, they've been the best of my life." "Mine too," I whispered. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the driveway of my house, looking at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the life I'd built with David, at the family I'd created. It was a good life, by most measures. Safe, stable, respectable. But it wasn't mine. Not really. I'd been living it for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something, to choose something, to be something other than what everyone expected me to be. I thought about Greg, about the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel alive. I thought about the impossible choice I was facing, about the people who would be hurt no matter what I decided. I crossed a line I can't uncross. But for those few weeks, I was a woman again, and I still want him. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? I sat in that car for a long time, staring at my house, at my life, at the choice that would define everything that came next. And for the first time in years, I didn't know what I was going to choose, but I knew that whatever I decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The old brass wind chime that had hung on Dad's porch since I was a child tinkled softly in the evening breeze, the same sound that had marked countless family gatherings, birthday parties, And quiet Sunday afternoons. Now it sounded like a funeral bell, marking the end of something I couldn't name and the beginning of something I couldn't predict. I still had that wind chimes melody in my head as I finally walked into my house, into my marriage, into whatever came next. Some lines, once crossed, change everything, even when you're not sure you want them to.